2012 Boardroom International Surfboard Expo continues. This is being brought to you by SoulSpot.com, SurfingMag.com, and of course, SurfersVillage.com. And now, our featured event of the day. Yes, we do have Mark Richards here, MR, and we're looking at some shaping going on right there. I believe in the shaping room right now, Ricky Carroll, our final competitor or entrant in the Icons of Foam, honoring Mark Richards, is shaping his US blank right now to mimic what we think is identical board that Mark Richards had years ago. He'll tell us about it. Todd Klein, David Stanfield, and Mark Richards. Everybody, thanks for joining in. And let's start off by saying good to meet you again.
Well,
and
again,
congratulations.
Yeah.
And the first question I have, what 13-year-old in the world would get a planer for Christmas?
Well, my mum was actually horrified because I got a planer for Christmas when I was 13 years old. Because how I started getting interested in shaping was my dad had a surf shop in Newcastle, and we would drive to Sydney and buy surfboards from Sydney and bring them back to Newcastle and retail them. And I used to collect offcuts of blanks, and I'd bring them home and actually join them together and make like miniature surfboards, you know, 2 and 3 foot long out of them. And it was really hard to get the skins off with sandpaper and a surf form. So I was bugging my dad to buy me an electric planer for Christmas, and eventually, you know, he relented and bought it for me. So, you know, I think most kids are bugging their parents to buy them a bike or a skateboard for Christmas. I was bugging mine for an electric planer because I wanted to start tearing into foam and shaping surfboards.
Well, Todd's got a bunch of questions, so do I, but I've got to ask you, your dad was a car salesman though, right?
Yeah, he was. He started out selling used cars in Newcastle, and he used to drive like into inland Australia and find cars that didn't have any rust in them, bring them back and retail them. So he saw a guy surfing in Newcastle one day and thought that looked like fun. Asked him where he bought the board. The guy had bought it from Sydney. My dad went to Sydney, bought a few boards, brought them back to Newcastle, started retailing them. So I've got these photos of the shop in the 50s and I guess 50s and the 60s with cars on the floor and surfboards around the walls. So eventually decided he was having more fun selling surfboards than cars. So he went from cars and surfboards to just surfboards. So I always joke I was born into this, you know, you got no choice kid, you're going surfing family.
And how old were you when you started surfing, MR?
I started when I was 5 years old. I think I got my first board. I started on a rubber surfer plane. Like you haven't got them here in the US, but it was made by a company called NAM, and it was like a blow-up sort of surfer plane. It was sort of like an air mat thing that you would sleep on if you went camping.
Yep.
So I started off with a small one and worked my way up to a bigger one. And then when I eventually got my first board, I already knew how to paddle and catch waves and stand up and turn. But my mum also surfed, so it was.
So she started you, or your father?
Well, my dad started me, but
okay.
My mum surfed as well. So all our weekends and sort of family holidays were basically at the beach. So we just went to the beach all the time. And in those days, there was no computer games, there were no DVDs, no videos. I don't think we even had a TV at the time. So, you know, for me, the beach was just this incredible playground where you could, you know, swim in the water, play in the sand, ride waves. It was just incredible. Like I loved being in the water and loved going surfing from the moment I started, and it's been an addiction. You know, I'm 54 years old and I'm still as surf stoked as I ever was. I don't think there's any sport in the world where you actually go to bed at night, you know, psyching on, you know, wondering on how good is the swell going to be tomorrow. Like I'm sure a tennis player doesn't go to bed thinking that, and I'm sure a golfer doesn't go to bed thinking that, but I think surfing's a very unique sport in that way.
The movie and the whole era of busting down the door. You were so low key, you didn't have to bust it down, you actually had the key. But in the water, very aggressive, on the beach, just did his thing. And the best quote ever, and I've got the quote right here. Listen to how competitive this man is. He goes, "I'm stupidly competitive. When it comes to putting on a colored singlet, I would paddle over the top of my mum to get the next wave."
I would. I don't know. Something happens to me when it's sort of mild-mannered on land, but the moment I get in a competitive situation and I put a singlet on, it's like the veil comes over. I don't know what it is, you know, and as I said, I'd paddle over the top of my mum if it meant getting a wave and winning a heat or losing a heat. So, you know, it's a strange thing. I guess it came from when I was young. I first started going in surfing contests in Newcastle in schoolboy events, and we used to win these like great big trophies, and I loved winning trophies. And that sort of continued with amateur surfing until the pro circuit kicked off in '76, and all of a sudden we went from checks to trophies. Sorry, from trophies to checks. And obviously checks were better than trophies. So I don't know, it's just, I just love competing. I actually loved beating people with a passion. I hated losing. And I still think about some of the heats I lost and some of the finals I lost, even to this day, where I actually went wrong. It's not something I dwell on, but if you're sitting on an aeroplane or you're a passenger in a car or something and someone, mentions something about an event, those memories come back of where I kind of went wrong and, things I wish I'd done differently.
So you started surfing at 5. At what point did you realize you wanted to compete? You had something, you felt you had the talent to compete. At what age was that? You said you're in schoolboy. Can you be as specific as an age?
I think I started surfing in the schoolboy events in Newcastle when I was about 12 or 13 in the under 14 division. So we have a very competitive culture in Australia where we have local board riding clubs, and there were schoolboy events, cadet events, juniors, seniors. So I worked my way sort of through all those events as I went on age-wise, winning trophies. And then I guess the pro events probably started in 1972. We started seeing events pop up around the world with prize money. And the pro circuit sort of kicked off in 1976. So for me, it was never a question of do I want to try and be a pro surfer? Do I think I'm good enough to have a career in pro surfing? It was something that just sort of evolved as I went along. I got to the age, 17 or 18, and all of a sudden pro surfing was there for me. So.
Amazing. Can you remember back to 1976, and it was the richest event in surfing. It was the Coke Surfabout in Sydney. A-rated event, $15,000 purse, and you ended up winning. And what you see if you take a look at the grid is everybody surfed 7 rounds, correct?
I think that was the year they had the man-on-man system, and it was you had to surf the rounds, and I think the points for manoeuvres.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a strange system they invented because I guess even to this day, it's still hard to understand the criteria of like who wins and who loses a heat. Some can win a heat or lose a heat by the smallest of margins. So back in the 70s and the 80s, they were trying all sorts of different systems to try and come up with the fairest winner. And the system they used at that Coke contest was every wave counted, and they had scores for every manoeuvre, and there was like a wave size. So if you caught a small wave and did a bottom turn and a cutback on a small wave, they might be worth 2 points each. If you did the same thing on a category 2 wave, which was a little bigger, they might be worth 4 points each. So it sort of worked because it rewarded the surfer who caught the best waves, but it backfired because it rewarded the guy who caught the most waves. So it turned into this thing where you're in a frenzy for the 20 minutes, trying to catch every wave that came through to score as many points as possible. And it also went over 7 rounds, but it was spaced out over, I think, 2 weeks because they had a waiting period waiting for the best surf.
The crazy time. One quick question, let's test your memory because it's like Kelly Slater's memory. He can remember what he lost 5 years ago in one heat. There was a woman that actually surfed in that event. Who was it?
I can't remember.
You just about said her name.
Laura Bliss?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you imagine that? A woman surfing in that event back then?
No, but there was a funny instance in the Newcastle event as a promotional thing. This was a few years ago. They actually ran a heat with Lane Beachley and Andy Irons. Lane was entered into the contest. I think they gave Lane a wild card. And, Andy, rest in peace, was scared of nothing. He wasn't scared of pipeline or Chopu or Waimea at 20 feet. He was one of the most fearless competitors we've ever seen. Like, there was no wave too dangerous. But I think it's the only time in my life where I've seen Andy nervous when he had to surf against Lane, because she's a great surfer, and I think Andy was worried the surf was small and inconsistent. I think he was worried that, if Lane got the waves, she had a chance of upsetting him.
Yeah, no doubt. Rewinding just a bit, going back to your childhood, in '76, you actually took shaping lessons from Dick Brewer, is that correct?
Yeah, when I left school, I wanted to be a surfboard shaper, and it was something I was aiming at as a career path, because I'd ridden surfboards by Jeff McCoy, who was a North Narrabeen-based surfboard manufacturer for a lot of my life. And a lot of my school holidays, I'd go to Sydney and actually stay with Jeff. And all the guys in the factory would work when there was no surf, and then they would surf when the waves were good. So if someone came into the factory and said the surf's good, they would drop tools and just go surfing. So I thought, this is like a really good lifestyle. You can work when you want to work. You're not set on a 9 to 5 thing. So again, back in those days, there was no such thing as pro surfing. So I was looking for a career path, and I was always interested in surfboard design and surfboard shaping. And the chosen career path was being a surfboard shaper. And in a funny way, pro surfing actually got in the way of that for a year. So what happened with Dick Brewer and the lessons was that I was always like reasonably self-taught. I could use all the tools, but I had a picture in my mind of where I actually wanted to go. Like I'd put a blank on the stands and I had a vision of what the finished board would actually look like, but my hands weren't, I didn't have the technique. I could use the tools, but didn't have the technique to finish with a vision. So I stayed on after the Hawaiian season and spent about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks shaping with Dick. So like he gave me templates and, you know, showed me techniques of using the planer and showed me how to cut in nose lift, tail lift, rockers, rail, concaves V, the whole deal. So he basically taught my hands to catch up with where my mind was at. So after the time I spent with him, which was invaluable, I could go into the shaping room, and if I had a vision of how the board was going to be, you know, my hands were capable of recreating it. So.
And that season of 76, 77 in Hawaii was the same general time that you actually saw Reno Avallero riding a twin fin for the surf first time as well. Is that correct?
Sorry, Austin?
Reno Avallero, that same
Reno.
time, 76,
Yeah.
77, was the first time you saw anyone really riding a twin fin and riding it the way he was riding it.
Well, I'd ridden twin fins sort of back in the McCoy days.
Okay.
In the very early 70s, and I think they were the ones that were influenced by American shapers at the time. I can remember seeing photos of Rolf Arness and Corky Carroll in Surfer magazine on really short twin fins with a round nose, sort of a wide rounded square tail, and a really thick tail where it was chamfered off, and 2 little fins on each corner. And I rode those boards originally, but they went nowhere design-wise. You know, they'd go in 2-foot surf and that was about it. So I got re-interested and re-inspired by twin fins in 1976 when Reno Avallero was in Australia for the Coke contest. And in those days, I just had one board. Reno was staying with Terry Fitzgerald, and he had this full quiver, everything from 7'4" guns down to fishers. So he had this little green, round nose, wide swallowtail twin fin fish, which was very similar to the San Diego, you know, Steve List style fishes. And as we spoke about before, in the points for manoeuvres of judging style of that event, Reno would get the fish out on the tiny days, and he would just be flying across the face and doing turns where other guys were bogging down. So he was kind enough to give me the dimensions of his board, and he suggested dimensions for mine. So I went home and, you know, made like this round sort of twin fin, which is actually, that's the recreation of it there, the bumblebee. And I did the colour work myself, hand sprayed the bumblebee, did everything on it, and that was sort of my fun muck around board at home. But I never had enough confidence to take it on the tour. And when I shaped with Brewer during that winter of 76, 77, I explained to him that I was having trouble on single fins in small surf with a narrow tail that was sinking. And I had this, you know, super wide twin fin at home that went really good in little waves, but I didn't have the confidence to take it on the tour. And it was actually his idea. He said, all you've got to do is go home, you know, get in the shaping room and try and find a happy medium between the 2 boards. You either blow the single fin out or you take the round twin fin and just, you know, narrow the thing down. And that was where the first twin fin that I came up with in 77, 78 was the board that I rode in the free ride movie. So surprisingly, you know, I don't know how I did it, but I kind of got the first one right. Everything came together in the first one, and that restarted the second twin fin revolution. And, you know, that board was, you know, it was the whole basis of competitive success, my contest wins, and it was a springboard for winning all the world titles.
you were frustrated. You said, okay, how can I take these? That was your secret weapon as you progressed on, correct? That board.
Well, yeah, I was totally frustrated in small surf on single fins. Like, they work great in bigger surf, but they didn't have the tail area to keep me afloat. Like, I'm 185 pounds, and I found I was sinking. So when I kind of, I came up with that board and sort of took it on the tour, I actually felt like I had a secret weapon and I had an advantage over the other guys. And I was like paranoid. I used to come out of the water and put it in a board cover and put it in the car. Like, I wouldn't let anyone look at it. It was like top secret technology.
Formula One, guys hiding the engines. Tom Parrish was a big part as well. Spider Murphy, 4 or 5 of those guys, you gleaned from what they were doing. Real quick, going back to Cam Highway, was Brewer's shaping room that you worked in, was that near Chun's Reef?
It was at Chun's Reef, yeah.
Okay, so he had one up at Diff Stumpers, basically Rocky Point, obviously
Yeah.
from Kauai, but how modern was it, or how rustic was it back then?
It was very rustic. I was staying with Jock Sutherland's mum. Reno Avalira had organised me a place to stay with Jock's mum, right at Jocko's between Chun's and Laniakea. So I got so much good surf down there during the 70s and the 80s. And it was when Brewer had the house at Chun's and the shaping room was behind the house. And it was basically a garage. You imagine Dick Brewer as the most iconic and possibly the greatest shaper we've ever seen on the planet. Would have some, Rolls-Royce style shaping room, like fully decked out. But it was just incredibly rustic, like an old garage. I think the only luxury he actually had in there was air conditioning. Tools everywhere, templates all over the floor, templates everywhere. There didn't seem to be a lot of structure to it. And the really incredible thing about seeing him surf seeing him shape was he actually attacked a blank with a planer. Like, when he finished it, it looked raw and really rough, and you'd sort of go, wow, the greatest shaper in the world, and it looks like a bit of a mess. But then he used to work a lot with 36 grit, which is like a really rough sandpaper. Happen where the board would all of a sudden just start to morph into something perfect in front of your eyes. It was really incredible to see him shape, and guys like Dick and Ben Iper, Reno, Tom Parrish, Jim Richardson, Pat Rawson, all those guys have really helped me throughout my shaping career, and they've all been good enough and kind enough and sharing enough to actually allow me to be in the room when they shape and to actually impart some of their knowledge. And even at the Boardroom show, I've actually learnt something watching the guys shape here.
That's
Very
awesome.
nice.
Well, a question that I'm real curious about, to hear some background on this. 17 years old, it was 1974. You got in as a late entry at Waimea Bay. Made it to the semifinals. First day, surf, it's sizable, but it's not that big. You show up in the morning, the bay's closing out. Tell us about that experience at 17 years old.
Well, Todd, it was a funny situation. I'd got into that event because I'd come second in the amateur Smirnoff the year before, and the first place getter in the amateur Smirnoff got an automatic entry to the pro Smirnoff that year. Michael Ho had beaten me, so Michael was in. I'd done well in some events in Australia. I was busting to get into the events in Hawaii. In those days, there were no ratings. You got in reputation only, so you had to go to Hawaii, surf big waves, and pretty much throw yourself at anything that sort of came up. So I'd written a letter to Fred Hemmings, basically, saying that, I was the best surfer in Australia and he should actually put me in this event. Wayne Bartholomew had done the same thing. Sean Thompson had done the same thing as well. So we knew that Tiger Macon from California hadn't shown, and there was one alternate spot, and Fred wouldn't say who the alternate was until about 10 minutes before the heat went in the water. So there's sort of 10 minutes to go at sunset. Fred goes, Mark Richards, you're the first alternate, pay your $75 entry fee. And I didn't have any money. So I'm just going, oh no, I'm not going to be able to go in it. Rabbit had brought the money to the beach. So Rabbit actually paid my entry fee to go in the event, which was incredibly generous of him at the time.
That's cool.
So I managed to get through, I think it was 2 rounds at sunset that day. And the next day it's 25 feet Waimea, and I'd never been out there in my life. I'd hardly ever surfed sunset. So I was 17 years old, and it was sort of a career crossroads. Like, I didn't want to go out, but I was more scared of the reaction that I would get from Sean and Rabbit if I didn't go out, seeing as I got the wild card in front of them. And I was also worried that I'd go home and then all my friends would go that I chickened out. I thought there's no way I can go home and explain to them how big it was. So I thought the safest thing was probably to go out there and drown. That was the best way to handle it. So I actually had a plan, and the plan was to paddle out and not take off. And then I had all the excuses organised. I thought I can come in and say, oh, I had 3 Hawaiian guys in the heat, they hassled me, I didn't know where to sit. I'd never been out there in my life, but it sort of turned out I paddled out, and it was like the thing I spoke about earlier, the singlet had gone on, the veil had gone over, and it kind of went into competitor mode, and I paddled straight out, and the set came, and no one was in position, and I caught a wave straight away, and actually made it. It was the most horrifying drop of my life. And then,
what size board?
I had an 8.6 that Jeff McCoy had made for me that I'd never ridden before. And then I started to worry in the heat that I might get through. So I came in, it was a 6-man heat, and I used to read out the results backwards. And I'm 6th, and it's like, oh no, 2 more chances. And then they announced 5th, and I didn't come 5th. And then they got to 4th place, and I'm going, please let me come 4th. I don't want to go back out. And they announced 4th place, and I'm leaping for joy. As though I'd won the contest, but it was because I'd come 4th and didn't have to go back out again. So it was just one of those things, at the time it was a career crossroads, and I didn't want to be the guy that was labelled, the rest of his life that had a shot, but, chickened out when the shit was hitting the fan, basically.
Yeah. So let's get into the world titles, Dave.
That's some heavy peer pressure right there, indirect peer pressure.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out and take a beating because I don't want to be beat up a little bit later.
Yeah, it was easier. I thought it was easier to go out there, drown or take a beating. I could hold my head high.
Hey, real quick, the logo, if we can get a shot of the MR logo right here. Looking back at logos and surfboard manufacturers, McTavish had the Big Mac and McDonald's sued him. Rabbit had WB, and Warner Brothers said, no, you get away kind of with a Superman logo.
I think it's better if we don't actually go there.
Okay.
I don't want to alert anyone to that logo. But the logo actually came from an infatuation with a black and white TV series in Australia, the Superman series. Because when I'd get home from school when I was in primary school, we had an old black and white small television. And there was a Superman series on every afternoon. I used to love it because the guy could fly. So one of the first brewers I got in Hawaii, I think it was in 1977, was sprayed by a guy by the name of Al Dove, who was an incredible airbrush artist, and he sprayed Superman on the bottom. And I had no idea. He just said, I'll surprise you with the deck. And he actually sprayed the emblem with MR in it. So that's where the logo actually came from. It was from the airbrushed artist Al Dove. I took the board home and everyone's going, oh, that thing's so cool. You've got to make that your logo from here on in.
That's awesome. Nice. Well, you won your first world title in 1979. Tell us a little bit about that year and maybe how it changed your mind entering into competition after that, defending titles, and you went on to do it 3 years consecutively after your first.
Well, Todd, the first one, there's no other way of saying it, but I won in 1979 by accident. Basically, people fell apart all around me. When the tour kicked off in '76, sponsorship wasn't great in those days, and the first prize checks in the events were only about $2,000 or $3,000. So, PT was our first world champ, followed by sort of Sean and Rabbit, and really those guys went into debt to sort of win the world title. So, I didn't have the vision that those guys had for a future in pro surfing, I didn't think it was actually going anywhere. So I was really career focused on being a surfboard shaper. I thought that was what I wanted to do. And I'd just compete selectively in some of the countries that I really liked going to. So that year in '79, I think there were about 7 or 8 events. There was 4 events in Australia and 3 in Japan. And I just got off to a really good start. I won some of the events and had nearly an unbeatable lead. And I've never forgotten PT and Ian Cairns was saying, all I had to do was go to, I think, South Africa, and maybe there was an event somewhere in the US, and I had the world title wrapped up before I got to Hawaii. So, it sounds silly at the time, but I wasn't actually interested in winning it. I was more focused on kind of going home and, developing my shaping craft. So going into Hawaii in that December at the end of '79, I'd slipped back to 4th place in the ratings. I got a 4th in the Pipeline Masters, which kept me in 4th place. And then the last event was the World Cup at Holyeva. And to win the world title, I needed to win the event. I needed Wayne Rabbit Bartholomew, defending world champ, to lose in round 1, which he did. I needed Dane Kealoha to lose in the quarterfinals, and he lost to Edwin Santos, who was a qualifier from Puerto Rico. And then I needed Shane Horan to lose in the semi-finals, which he did to Peter Townend. And then I needed to win the final. So going into it, there was no pressure, because I thought, there's no way, you know, it's hard enough to win the event, but to win the event and have the 3 people ahead of me just go out in the round that I need them to go out in, like one more round if those guys had won, would have made a difference. So I kind of, you know, I sort of won by accident, you know. Great start. The rest of the guys all fell apart around me. And then after winning it, I went, oh, this is pretty cool. I like being world champ. And, you know, I understood why the guys had actually travelled and put themselves into debt to actually win the world title. So I thought, you know, no one's ever won twice. I should go and try and win again. And that went on for 4 years. And after winning the 4th time, I think I was sort of physically and mentally burnt out on the travelling, and I was having trouble with my back. And I was still, the whole time, you know, I was still more career focused on shaping. And even when I was on, you know, during those world title years, in between the events, I would come home and I'd work in our retail store and start shaping surfboards again. It was like that was happening sort of in another life, you know? So it was kind of funny.
Knowing Kelly Slater's the only other surfer that has more titles than you, and you've got 4 consecutively, tell us, you know, like, does it, I don't know, you know, winning 4 world titles, does it get boring? Do you, because I feel anyway, watching Kelly, sometimes he'll change his equipment just prior to a heat to motivate himself. There's certain athletes that motivate certain individuals as well. Was there anything that you drew upon, whether it be equipment, something to motivate MR to go on to win another world title after you've won 3 and you're chasing your 4th?
Todd, I guess I was just trying to set a record. You know, I think when anyone sets a sporting record, they hope that it will never be broken. It doesn't matter whether it's, you know, football, tennis or golf. But I think the reality of sporting records is that they give the people coming up after you, you know, something to achieve, or something to actually achieve, strive for, or beat. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of create some sort of sporting record that I, you know, hope would last for a number of years. And I, you know, really loved that time on the tour, and I really loved competing. But it's sort of a different era. You know, I wasn't really motivated by getting a new board, because what would happen, I'd do the tour with 5 boards. I'd do 2 twin fins at the beginning of the year, small wave twin fin and a bigger wave twin fin, and then I'd shape 3 boards for Hawaii at the end of the year, and that was basically it. So the inspiration was coming from, you know, kind of knowing I had the boards right. A lot of the time the inspiration came from the other competitors making, you know, statements about where they thought surfing was heading, or who they thought was going to win the world title, or, you know, saying that they were going to, you know, beat me this year. And I'm thinking, yeah, right, you know, we'll see. So a lot of the time the other competitors were actually, you know, waving the red flag in front of me. And, you know, it's interesting that you sort of mentioned Kelly, because, you know, his, you know, competitive drive has just been phenomenal, to have won so many world titles and to have stayed motivated for that amount of time. And we were talking about it last night at dinner, but, you know, generationally, he's surfed his way through so many different generations of surfers. Like, he surfed his way through the guys of his own age bracket, the Momentum crew, and then through the, you know, the Mick Fanning, Joel Parkinson, Taj Burrow era, and then guys like Julian Wilson and Owen Wright, and now, you know, to this whole new era of, you know, guys like John and Kalohi. You know, I think maybe John wasn't even born when Kelly won his first world title. So we've never, you know, I may be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I don't think we've ever seen a competitive athlete on this planet who's, you know, 40 or so years old beat teenagers. That just doesn't happen in sport. And because of that reason, you know, I think Kelly is the greatest competitive athlete we've ever seen on the planet. You know, I'm not trying to compare surfing to boxing or anything, but I think you can compare, in terms of what he's done at his age and the generations that he's surfed his way through, and the way that he's also changed his surfing as time has gone on. You know, when Kelly first started on the tour, like the air thing wasn't a big part of the tour. You know, all these young guys have brought this air act to the tour, and Kelly at 40 years old can do as good, if not better, aerials than all the young guys that, you know, really develop the aerial sort of stuff. So I think we're kind of living in this era where we're seeing the, you know, the greatest competitive sportsman we'll ever see on the planet, and, you know, anyone who gets to meet him or knows him or spends time with him or gets to see him surf is very fortunate, because I think we'll look back the same way as people, you know, guys may look back now and say, I saw Muhammad Ali fight, you know, or I saw Michael Jordan play.
Well, who knows? You know, that was you back in the day, winning 4 years consecutively. Now Kelly with 11, possibly 12. Who knows? Maybe one day that record will die. Do you have any other questions? We could go on, Dave.
I talked to Randy Rarick by way of text when he was over in France, and I asked about World Championship trophies. Well, your first 3 were plaques this big. The 4th trophy we think Rabbit took, and your manager had to go to the gift shop at the Turtle Bay Hotel to give you something, and ironically, your dad probably appreciated it was a wooden car that a tour was to buy as a World Championship trophy. Your 4th, a lot of people don't know that. How classic.
Well, it's and there was no plaque on it either. It was like a toy wooden car. You know, it's actually I've just started a blog. I've got a website. It's markrichardssurfboards.com, and just on the right-hand corner of the homepage, there's a link to the blog. And about 2 weeks ago, I found all those trophies because we were doing this massive clean-up at home, and I found them, and I did a blog on them. They're so classic. It's like they're world title trophies, and they're these little tiny, you know, puny sort of plaques. You know, you think you would get some massive, incredible trophy. Yeah.
Who was
So go to my blog, and, you know, if you're watching, go to my blog and check it out.
Was Rasmussen an agent, a manager? Who got you?
I didn't have a manager at the time.
Well, who got the trophy? Somebody got you a car.
I thought Randy and Fred Hemmings.
Oh, somebody. They went to the gift shop, right?
But they did give me the perpetual trophy. There was a really big perpetual trophy that was donated by Pan Am. And each year, you know, the name of the winner would go on. And it went back to the Pan Am offices in Honolulu. So after, after I won in '82, I think they'd run out of room on the trophy. And Pan Am wanted the trophy back. I think they wanted to take it back to their corporate offices in New York. But Randy sort of said, why don't you just grab the trophy and take it home, and I'll say someone, you know, walked away with it. So I managed to walk away with the perpetual trophy, which is a pretty incredible trophy.
You saved that wooden car from the gift shop. That is classic.
No, he's got photos of it on his blog.
Excellent.
I'm going to check that out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so what motivates you today? Our last question in terms of watching surfers, obviously Kelly Slater, but do you watch all the events online?
I watch some of them. Some of them, you know, some I'm more interested in others. I think it just depends on the surf. I was really interested in watching the Trestles event because, you know, Kelly just goes so crazy at Trestles, and I was just interested to see how, you know, Mick Fanning and Joel Parkinson would go. You know, while I've been here, you know, just prior to the Boardroom show, I was on a Quicksilver wetsuit tour. So we watched bits of the Quicksilver Pro in France, and there were some crazy waves there. So I sort of watch bits and pieces, but, you know, I don't sit down and watch them from start to finish the way some people do. I just feel like I've got so much stuff going on at home with, you know, shaping surfboards and the family and 3 kids and trying to get in the water at the time that, you know, it really feels like there's not enough time. There's not enough time to fit everything in. And the funny thing about sort of getting older is, like, I'm 54 now. It feels like your life is accelerating. You know, you sort of, I guess when you get in your 50s and you're in the back third of your life. And surfing and shaping, I think, keeps you young and keeps you creative. You know, like I clean my teeth in the mirror in the morning and I look and I go, who's the old guy looking at me, you know? Because inside you don't actually feel any different. So I think it's the wonderful thing about surfing is it keeps you stoked and it keeps you young, and it's really incredible being a surfboard shaper and actually shaping surfboards for people, because there's not many things you do in life where you get this amazing feedback from people and you're also affecting the quality of their recreational time. Like it's so great when you make someone a board and you see them a month or 2 later and they go, hey, I'm really stoked, my board's going really good, you know, I feel like my surfing's improved, I'm having a great time on it. It makes you feel really good, and it's also great, you know, seeing people ride your boards as well. It's, you know, it gives you a good inner glow. Excellent.
Real quick, the shop is closed down in Newcastle, but we can still track you down on the web and we can get a board from you. I'm on the website, markrichardssurfboards.com, and there's various places around the planet where you can get them. So check out the site and also check out the blog. There's some pretty cool stuff on there.
Alrighty, MR, absolute
Unreal.
Pleasure.
All right,
Thank you so
cool,
much.
guys.
I know you've been a major hit here. One last thing, when are we going to wrap things up in the Icons of Foam? Obviously, we're acknowledging and recognizing and paying homage to one of the greatest athletes and shapers of all time, MR. When do we crown the champion today? Do we know?
I think 3 o'clock this afternoon.
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock this afternoon, yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you, MR. Coming up next, more live action here from Del Mar, California. Stay with us. We'll see you soon.